Welcome back to Graves of Empire, where we dig into the darker, stranger corners of history, the stories that don't get a clean ending. If you've just come from watching Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, you've spent 2.5 hours with a king trying to find his way home from a war through a world that keeps trying to kill him. That's the myth. Today, we're going back roughly 3,200 years to find out what the real world looked like at the exact moment that myth is set, and the answer is stranger and better documented than you might expect. There was a real collapse, real cities burned, and one king in a city called Ugarit wrote a letter begging for rescue that never made it out the door. Homer gave us a hero who eventually made it home. History isn't sure the real world got that ending. Let's get into it. In the ruins of a city called Ugarit, on the coast of modern Syria, archaeologists found a clay tablet still sitting in its kiln. It had never been sent. It was a letter from the king of this city to an ally across the sea, begging for ships, begging for help. The city burned before the letter could be fired and dispatched. The clay hardened in the same fire that destroyed everything around it. We know exactly what this king was afraid of. He named it enemy ships. He never learned who they were. Neither entirely do we. This is the story of the collapse that ended an age of palaces, kings, and writing systems that vanished so completely, some of them were not deciphered again for 3,000 years. It was caused in part by people history remembers only by the wreckage they left behind. We call them the Sea Peoples. We do not know what they called themselves. Around 1200 BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean was not a scattering of small kingdoms. It was a network, an interlocking, correspondence-heavy system of great powers who wrote to each other constantly like a Bronze Age diplomatic internet. Egypt, under the Pharaohs, the Hittite Empire, in modern-day Turkey, Mycenaean Greece, the world of Agamemnon and the palace at Mycenae, Assyria, Babylon, Cyprus, and coastal trading cities like Ugarit, which sat at the crossroads of nearly all of it. They traded tin and copper to make bronze. They exchanged royal daughters in marriage. They wrote letters of complaint to one another about shipments running late. We have these letters. Kings addressed each other as brother. This was a system built on the assumption that it would continue. Every palace economy, every trade route, every alliance was a bet that tomorrow would look like today. The tin alone tells you how interconnected this world was. Bronze needs copper and tin is rare. The nearest major sources were as far away as modern Afghanistan and Cornwall in England. A bronze sword forged in Mycenae might contain metal that had already passed through a dozen hands and several seas to get there. This wasn't a world of isolated kingdoms. It was a supply chain, and like any supply chain, it only worked as long as every link held. We know how tightly bound these courts were, partly because of an archive found at Amarna in Egypt. Hundreds of letters between pharaohs and the other great kings of the age, negotiating gifts, marriages, and grievances in a shared diplomatic language used across the whole region. One letter is a king complaining that the gold he received was underweight. Another negotiates a royal marriage down to specific terms. These were people who assumed they'd still be writing to each other's grandchildren. Within about 50 years, almost all of it was gone. Historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse, and it remains one of the strangest catastrophes in the historical record, not because of what happened, but because of how much of it we still cannot explain. City after city was destroyed. Mycenae, Pylos, Hattusa, the Hittite capital, an empire that had rivaled Egypt, simply stops appearing in the historical record. Ugarit burned so thoroughly that its final layer of destruction is still marked in the soil by ash. At Pylos, on the Greek mainland, archaeologists found something almost as haunting as the Ugarit letters, a set of clay tablets recording what looked like last-minute military preparations, bronze being requisitioned, men assigned to watch the coastline in shifts, rowers being counted and organized into units. The palace at Pylos was keeping careful administrative records right up until the moment it burned, and then it simply stopped, mid-bureaucracy, as if the scribes had been interrupted. Hattusa, the Hittite capital, tells a different kind of story. The city wasn't looted the way you'd expect from a raid. Many of its most valuable archives and treasures appear to have been removed before the destruction, not stolen during it. Some historians now think the Hittite court may have already been abandoning its own capital, weakened by famine and internal succession disputes, before any outside force finished the job. The empire that had once negotiated as an equal with Egypt didn't fall to a single dramatic invasion. It seems to have hollowed out first. The most detailed account we have comes from Egypt, carved into the walls of the temple at Medine Habu. Pharaoh Ramesses III recorded that a coalition of foreign peoples came by land and by sea, and that no land could stand before their arms. He listed their names: Peliset, Jeker, Shekelesh, Denyen, Weshesh, names that don't cleanly match any group we can otherwise identify. The inscriptions describe two battles in particular: a land battle somewhere near Egypt's border, where Ramesses claims to have met an advancing coalition that was reportedly bringing entire families with it in ox carts, not just warriors but women, children, and household goods, as though this were a migration as much as an invasion, and a naval battle in the Nile Delta, where Egyptian forces are shown trapping enemy ships in the river mouth and destroying them in some of the only detailed ship-to-ship combat imagery to survive from this era anywhere in the ancient world. Egypt claimed victory in both, but it's worth noticing what that victory actually looked like afterward: a diminished kingdom, a shrinking sphere of influence, and a pharaoh who needed to carve his win into a temple wall in unusually loud detail. Sometimes the loudest victory claims come from the powers most worried about how weak they actually look. This is where the mystery actually lives. We have a pharaoh's word that they existed. We have destruction layers across the Mediterranean, roughly matching the timeline. What we do not have is a single source written by the sea peoples themselves. Every word we have about them comes from the people they were attacking. It's a little like reconstructing a storm entirely from the damage it left behind, with no weather report to check it against. Ugarit gives us the closest thing to a ground-level account. Its king, Ammurapi, wrote to the king of Cyprus in a moment of open panic. His fleet, he explained, was away, stationed elsewhere, fighting a different threat, or simply not where he needed it. His letter describes enemy ships already sighted at sea, and there was nothing left in the harbor to stop them. Another tablet from Ugarit's military commander is even more direct. The enemy ships have already burned towns, and if more ships appear, someone had better write back immediately. No reply survives. Whether one was ever sent, we don't know. What we do know is that Ugarit was destroyed and never resettled at that location. The city that had translated between empires, that sat at the center of the era's diplomatic and trading network, went silent in the space of what may have been weeks. The tablet survived purely by accident. The fire that killed the city also baked its clay archive into permanence. Ugarit's final testimony exists because the same catastrophe that silenced it also preserved its last words. For over a century, historians have proposed answers, and each one changes the story in a different way. The invasion theory is the oldest and the one that matches the Egyptian inscriptions most literally: a coalition of foreign peoples, possibly from the Aegean or western Anatolia, moving south and east as an organized armed migration, taking down everything in their path. This is the version closest to what Rameses III himself seems to describe, ox carts and all. The internal collapse theory points the finger inward instead. In this version, the palace economies were already failing under their own weight. Overly centralized systems, dependent on long, fragile supply chains for tin and grain, vulnerable to any disruption. The sea peoples, in this telling, weren't the cause of the collapse. They were opportunists, arriving to loot a system that was already dying, the way scavengers follow a wounded animal rather than kill it themselves. The climate theory has gained real traction in the last 2 decades, using something the ancient scribes never had access to: samples of ancient pollen and analysis of the isotopes in cave formations, both used to reconstruct rainfall patterns across the eastern Mediterranean. Several independent studies now point to a serious, multi-decade drought settling over the region right around this time. A civilization built on grain surplus doesn't survive a multi-generational dry spell gracefully. It starves, and starving populations don't stay put. They migrate, they raid, they become, from the perspective of whoever they encounter next, an invading horde. And more recently, a systems collapse theory has tried to hold all of this together at once, arguing that no single cause is sufficient because this was a tightly interconnected network, and tightly interconnected networks don't fail one node at a time. They fail all at once, in cascade, the way a power grid goes dark, region by region, once enough of it is overloaded. Drought weakens harvests. Weak harvests destabilize palaces. Unstable palaces can't maintain their armies or their trade routes. Trade routes failing means bronze becomes scarce, which means weapons and tools become scarce, which further destabilizes whoever's left. Somewhere in that cascade, a wave of displaced, hungry, armed people starts moving by land and by sea, not as a single army with a single goal, but as an emergent symptom of a system that had already stopped working. Earthquake evidence adds one more layer researchers didn't expect. At several of the destroyed sites, archaeologists have found what look like earthquake damage patterns layered directly beneath the burn marks, collapsed walls consistent with seismic activity, not fire or siege. It's possible that in at least some cities, an earthquake came first, and the fire that finished the job was simply looting or accidental in the chaos that followed. Put together, it's likely the Sea Peoples weren't the sole cause of the collapse. They were what finished off a system already buckling under drought, earthquake, and internal failure. They may as easily have been fellow victims of the same crisis, turned raiders by desperation, as they were a coordinated invading force. We are, in effect, trying to identify the cause of death of an entire era using only the testimony of the corpse. Egypt endured, though diminished, never again reaching its former reach. Greece did not. The Mycenaean palaces fell silent, and the region entered a period so poor in written record that historians simply call it a dark age, centuries in which literacy itself seems to have been lost, only to be reinvented later using a different alphabet for different purposes, and eventually, generations on, the memory of that lost Bronze Age world survived only as legend, as poetry, as the story of a king who fought a war across the sea and spent 10 more years trying to find his way home to a world that no longer quite existed the way he remembered it. It's the same story you may have just watched play out on a movie screen. Nolan's version gives that king a face, a voice, a journey you can follow scene by scene. Real history can't give you that. What it can give you is something the film can't, Actual letters written in a moment of real panic by real people who had no idea whether they'd survive the week, let alone become legend. We don't know if Homer's Troy has any relationship at all to the actual destruction layer archaeologists have found at Hezarlik. We don't know if the Sea Peoples inspired the wandering, displaced world of the Odyssey, or if the poem is simply describing, in the language of myth, what an entire generation had genuinely lived through, a world of burned palaces, broken alliances, and men who never made it home. What we do know is that somewhere in a kiln in Ugarit, a king's last words to an ally sat unfired and unsent, because the fire that should have finished the letter finished the city instead. He asked for help. We don't know if it ever came. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, consider leaving a like. It genuinely helps this channel find its way to more people who care about history like this. If you're new here, subscribe. We bring you a new dark history every episode. Real stories, real sources, no easy answers. And if you've got a theory of your own about who the Sea Peoples really were, or what you think happened to Ammurapi City, drop it in the comments. I read all of them. Until next time.